Most people think nurseries exist to help them grow plants successfully. And while that's partly true, there's another side most gardeners slowly discover with experience. Some plants are easy to grow, long-lasting, and endlessly productive, and those plants don't always benefit businesses that rely on repeat purchases. Plants that grow forever, multiply on their own, or refuse to die don't bring customers back every season. That's why there are certain plants you rarely see promoted, displayed front and center, or explained properly. Not because they're bad plants, but because once you grow them, you stop buying replacements. They save money, effort, and frustration. And once you know them, you start gardening differently. Welcome back to Daily Plant Life. Today we're talking about 10 plants nurseries don't want you to know about. Plants that are resilient, self-sustaining, and quietly powerful. These are the plants that grow back stronger, multiply without permission, and teach you that gardening doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. Plant number 1 is sweet potato vine. And this is one of those plants that looks simple on the surface but completely changes the way you think about gardening once you understand it. Most people encounter sweet potato vine as a decorative plant spilling out of containers, sold as something seasonal and temporary. What's rarely explained is that this plant is not delicate, not short-lived, and definitely not meant to be replaced every few months. Sweet potato vine is aggressive in the best way possible. It is designed by nature to survive, spread, and regenerate continuously, no matter how many times it's cut back. What makes sweet potato vine so powerful is its ability to root anywhere it touches soil. Every single node along the vine has the potential to become a brand new plant. You don't need special hormones, perfect soil, or expert skills. You can cut a vine, drop it in water or soil, and within days it starts forming roots. This means one plant can turn into 10, 10 can turn into 50, and suddenly you realize you never needed to buy this plant more than once. That kind of self-renewing growth doesn't fit well into a business model built on repeat purchases. Sweet potato vine thrives in heat, poor soil, containers, raised beds, and even neglected corners of the garden. It doesn't panic when conditions aren't perfect. Instead, it focuses on growth, ground coverage, and survival. As it spreads, it shades the soil, reduces moisture loss, and suppresses weeds naturally. Over time, you stop seeing it as just a plant and start seeing it as a living system that protects and feeds itself. Once you experience that level of abundance from a single plant, gardening stops feeling expensive and starts feeling empowering. Plant number 2 is Moringa, often called the miracle tree, and it earns that title not through marketing, but through performance. Moringa grows with an urgency that surprises most gardeners. From seed or cutting, it establishes quickly and starts producing usable leaves long before many other plants even settle in. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions or ideal soil. It adapts, adjusts, and keeps growing, even in environments where other plants struggle to survive. What makes Moringa especially overlooked in nurseries is how efficient it is. Once it's established, it replaces things people normally buy regularly: leafy greens, powders, supplements, and even ornamental shade plants. You can cut Moringa down almost to the ground, and instead of weakening, it responds by sending out more branches and more leaves. Harvesting doesn't exhaust it, harvesting activates it. The plant is designed to respond to use, not preservation. Over time, Moringa becomes less of a plant and more of a permanent presence in the garden. It doesn't fade after one season. It grows alongside you, adjusting to how you harvest and how you care for it. It tolerates heat, drought, and inconsistent watering without complaint. Nurseries don't push plants like this because once a gardener understands Moringa, they stop chasing fragile greens and start relying on something that always shows up. It teaches patience, confidence, and trust in resilient growth. Plant number 3 is ginger, a plant whose power is completely hidden beneath the soil. Most people only know ginger as something they buy wrapped in plastic, use once, and forget about. What they don't realize is that ginger is not a one-time crop, it's a cycle. A single piece of ginger root, once planted, doesn't disappear when you harvest. It multiplies quietly underground, creating a system that renews itself season after season. Ginger prefers warmth and loose soil, but it doesn't demand perfection. It grows slowly at first, focusing on root development rather than flashy leaves. That slow start tricks many people into thinking nothing is happening, but beneath the surface, the plant is building strength. As months pass, the rhizomes expand outward, forming new growth points that will become future plants. When harvest time comes, you can take what you need and leave the rest undisturbed, allowing the cycle to continue naturally. Once ginger is established, buying it again feels unnecessary. You begin to understand that the plant isn't meant to be pulled out completely. It's meant to be managed, respected, and revisited. Ginger rewards patience, not force. It thrives when you let it stay rooted and return to it gradually. This kind of long-term productivity doesn't align with quick sales, but it aligns perfectly with gardeners who want reliability, sustainability, and control over what they grow. Plant number 4 is perennial spinach, and this category of plants quietly solves one of the biggest frustrations gardeners face: leafy greens that promise abundance and then disappear. Traditional spinach grows fast, bolts quickly, and forces you to replant over and over again. Perennial spinach plays a completely different game. Once established, it doesn't rush to flower and give up. It settles in, adapts to its environment, and focuses on steady, repeated production. Plants like longevity spinach and Malabar spinach thrive in heat where other greens collapse. They tolerate humidity, inconsistent watering, and less than perfect soil without shutting down. Instead of producing one harvest and ending its life cycle, perennial spinach responds to cutting by producing more leaves. Each harvest encourages fresh growth rather than exhaustion. This creates a rhythm where the plant becomes part of your daily routine instead of a short-term project. Over time, perennial spinach becomes a background producer, always present, always dependable. You stop planning around it and start relying on it. It doesn't demand attention or constant feeding. It simply grows, quietly and consistently, offering leaves when you need them. This kind of long-term reliability doesn't generate repeat sales, but it creates confident gardeners who no longer feel dependent on seasonal planting schedules. Plant number 5 is Chaya, sometimes called tree spinach, and it challenges the idea that edible plants must be delicate. Chaya grows as a woody shrub, not a fragile vegetable, which immediately sets it apart. Once planted, it establishes deep roots and becomes extremely drought-tolerant. It doesn't collapse under heat, and it doesn't require rich soil to thrive. It focuses on survival first, production second, which is exactly why it lasts. Chaya responds incredibly well to cutting. When you harvest leaves or cut branches, the plant doesn't weaken. Instead, it sends out new shoots, becoming bushier and stronger over time. This means you can shape it, control its size, and harvest regularly without fear of killing it. It grows back thicker, not thinner. That kind of response is rare among leafy plants. As the years pass, Chaya stops feeling like something you planted and starts feeling like something that belongs. It becomes part of the landscape, not something you replace each season. Nurseries rarely emphasize plants like this because they don't fit the idea of short-term gardening. Chaya teaches gardeners patience and rewards them with consistency. Plant number 6 is Egyptian spinach, also known as jute mallow, and this plant thrives on being used. Egyptian spinach grows fast, especially in warm weather, and responds enthusiastically to harvesting. Instead of slowing down when you cut it, it accelerates. The more you harvest, the more tender shoots it produces, creating a cycle of continuous growth. This plant doesn't require pampering. It grows in poor soil, tolerates heat, and doesn't collapse under heavy use. In fact, neglect often makes it stronger. Once it flowers and drops seeds, it ensures its own return. Many gardeners think it's gone, only to see it reappear on its own the following season, stronger than before. Egyptian spinach doesn't ask permission to exist. It integrates itself into the garden and becomes dependable through repetition, not care. This kind of self-sustaining behavior doesn't align with neatly labeled nursery plants, but it aligns perfectly with real gardens where time, water, and attention are limited. It teaches gardeners that abundance often comes from letting plants do what they naturally want to do. Plant number 7 is lemongrass, and this is one of those plants that quietly teaches gardeners how unnecessary repeat buying really is. Lemongrass is often sold as a single stalk or small clump, usually marketed as something you harvest once in a while and replace when it weakens. What's rarely explained is that lemongrass is not a short-term plant at all. It is a long-living, self-multiplying system that becomes stronger the longer you keep it. When you plant lemongrass, whether in the ground or in a container, it immediately focuses on building a dense root base. That root base is where the real power is. Over time, the plant begins to divide itself naturally, forming multiple stalks that can be separated, replanted, or left together to grow into a thick, resilient clump. Each stalk is capable of becoming a whole new plant. One purchase turns into many, quietly and without effort. Lemongrass thrives in heat, tolerates drought once established, and doesn't collapse if you forget it for a while. You can cut it back hard, harvest heavily, and it still returns with fresh growth. As the clump matures, it becomes pest-resistant, aromatic, and visually striking. This is the kind of plant that teaches you patience and rewards consistency, not perfection. Nurseries don't emphasize that because once you understand lemongrass, you realize it was never meant to be replaced. Only divided and shared. Plant number 8 is Purslane, a plant that completely challenges what people think a valuable plant should look like. Purslane is often dismissed as a weed because it doesn't arrive neatly labeled or carefully spaced. It appears suddenly, spreads easily, and grows where nothing else wants to grow. But that behavior is exactly what makes it powerful. Purslane is a survival plant, built for harsh conditions and neglect. Purslane thrives in dry soil, compacted ground, cracks in walkways, and intense heat. It doesn't rely on rich compost or regular watering. Instead, it stores moisture in its leaves and stems, allowing it to survive where other plants give up. When you cut Purslane, it doesn't die, it branches. When you pull it up carelessly, pieces left behind often reroot. The plant is designed to persist, not impress. Once you stop fighting Purslane and start observing it, you realize how reliable it is. It grows fast, returns on its own, and fills gaps in the garden without effort. Over time, gardeners who allow Purslane to exist stop worrying about bare soil and failed crops. It becomes a quiet teacher, showing that resilience often looks messy before it looks intentional. Plants like this don't fit nursery marketing, but they fit real gardens perfectly. Plant number 9 is Pigeon pea, a plant that works on a timescale most modern gardening ignores. Pigeon pea is not a fast, flashy annual meant to be pulled out after one season. It grows slowly at first, focusing on deep roots and structural strength. That slow beginning often causes people to overlook it, but patience is exactly what pigeon pea rewards. As pigeon pea matures, it becomes a semi-woody shrub that can live for years. It tolerates heat, poor soil, and inconsistent watering while continuing to grow steadily. What makes it especially valuable is what it does underground. Pigeon pea improves soil quality by fixing nitrogen, meaning it feeds the soil while feeding you. Over time, the land around it becomes more fertile simply because the plant exists there. Once established, pigeon pea becomes part of the garden's foundation. It doesn't need replanting every year. It doesn't demand constant attention. You prune it, and it responds with new growth. You harvest from it, and it continues producing. This kind of long-term contribution doesn't align with seasonal plant sales, but it aligns perfectly with gardeners who want systems instead of cycles. Plant number 10 is aloe vera, a plant that most people underestimate because it looks calm, slow, and almost inactive. Aloe doesn't rush to grow, doesn't demand attention, and doesn't react dramatically to neglect, which is why many people assume it's weak or temporary. In reality, aloe is one of the most self-sufficient plants you can grow. It evolved to survive long dry periods, poor soil, and inconsistent care by storing everything it needs inside its thick, fleshy leaves. This allows the plant to remain stable even when conditions are far from ideal, something many nursery plants simply cannot do. What makes aloe especially important in this list is how it reproduces without effort. Over time, a healthy aloe plant produces pups at its base, small, complete plants that already know how to survive. These pups are not fragile seedlings. They are fully formed, resilient clones that can be separated and grown on their own with almost no adjustment period. One aloe plant slowly becomes many, not because you forced it to, but because the plant decided the conditions were right. This natural multiplication removes the need to ever buy aloe again, which is rarely explained clearly at the point of sale. Aloe thrives in containers, windowsills, balconies, and dry indoor environments where other plants struggle. It prefers being left alone, watered sparingly, and allowed to grow at its own pace. Over time, it becomes something permanent rather than seasonal. You don't plan to replace aloe, you plan around it. This quiet permanence is exactly why aloe fits among plants nurseries don't highlight too strongly. Once you understand aloe, you stop thinking in terms of replacement and start thinking in terms of long-term presence. When you look at these plants together, something important becomes clear. None of them rely on perfect care, constant feeding, or seasonal replacement. They grow back, multiply quietly, and adapt to the spaces they're given. These are plants that don't demand control. They respond to understanding. Once you start growing plants like this, gardening stops feeling like a cycle of buying and failing and starts feeling like a system that supports itself over time. The truth is, nurseries don't always highlight plants that last forever because forever doesn't need replacing. But for home gardeners, these are the plants that build confidence. They teach patience, observation, and trust in natural growth. They remind us that the best plants aren't always the flashiest ones. They're the ones that stay. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it, subscribe to Daily Plant Life, and share which of these plants surprised you the most. Keep growing what lasts, keep learning from your plants, and I'll see you in the next one.